Good evening, night dwellers. Welcome to the channel where shadows whisper and eerie tales soothe you to sleep. Let me guide you through tonight's chilling stories. Relax, close your eyes, and let the darkness take you. Sweet dreams. First story, The Whispering Pines. It was the height of summer when my friends, Jack, Emma, Chris, and Lily, and I decided to camp in the Whispering Pines, a dense forest notorious for its eerie, whispering sounds. Despite the local legends, we dismissed them as mere stories and were eager to explore. We arrived in the late afternoon, the golden sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, casting long shadows. We set up our tents near a small clearing by a brook, the air filled with the sounds of chirping birds and rustling leaves. As night fell, the temperature dropped slightly, making the campfire's warmth comforting. After a hearty meal, we gathered around the fire, sharing ghost stories. Emma, ever the skeptic, laughed at the tales of haunted woods and mysterious disappearances. "Come on, it's just the wind," she said, as the forest around us grew darker. As the night deepened, the whispering began. At first, it was a faint rustling, like leaves being stirred by a gentle breeze. But soon, the whispers grew louder, more distinct, forming words we couldn't quite understand. We fell silent, listening intently. "Did you hear that?" Chris whispered, his face pale. "It's just the wind," Emma repeated, though her voice wavered. Lily suggested we take a walk to explore. With flashlights in hand, we ventured deeper into the forest. The whispers seemed to follow us, growing louder with each step. The trees loomed above, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out. "Maybe we should go back," Jack said, his usual bravado faltering. We stumbled upon an old, dilapidated cabin hidden among the trees. The windows were shattered, and the door hung ajar. The whispers seemed to emanate from the cabin, drawing us closer. Despite our fear, curiosity got the better of us, and we approached the cabin. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. Broken furniture and tattered curtains filled the room. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. Emma shone her flashlight around, revealing strange symbols carved into the wooden walls. "What is this place?" she asked, unease creeping into her voice. Suddenly the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The temperature plummeted, and we could see our breath in the air. The cabin door slammed shut behind us, plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispering resumed, louder and more insistent. The symbols on the walls began to glow, with an eerie light illuminating the room. I spotted a journal on a dusty table and picked it up. The entries were dated over a century ago, detailing the experiences of a previous inhabitant driven mad by the whispers. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice trembling. We huddled together, trying to think of a way to escape. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the corner of the room. It was a ghostly apparition of a woman, her face twisted in anguish. She reached out towards us, and the whispers grew louder, almost deafening. "Help me," the ghostly woman whispered, her voice merging with the whispers around us. Chris, desperate to escape, began to recite a prayer his grandmother had taught him. As he spoke, the whispers grew fainter, and the ghostly figure seemed to recoil. Encouraged, we joined in, and the cabin's oppressive atmosphere began to lift. The door suddenly flew open, and we wasted no time in fleeing the cabin. We ran through the forest, not stopping until we reached our campsite. The whispering had stopped, replaced by the sounds of the night. Breathless and shaken, we decided to pack up and leave immediately. As we drove away from Whispering Pines, we vowed never to return. The memory of the ghostly woman and the sinister whispers haunted us for years to come, a chilling reminder of our encounter with the supernatural. Second story, The Cryptid of Blackwood Forest. Camping in the dense, shadowy woods of the Pacific Northwest had always been on my bucket list. The untouched beauty, the crisp air, and the sense of isolation from the bustling city life were what drew me there. My friends were equally enthusiastic. We set off early one Friday morning, our SUV packed with supplies and our spirits high. Little did we know, this trip would be anything but a peaceful retreat. The forest was more magnificent than I had imagined. Towering pines stretched towards the sky, their branches whispering secrets to the wind. We found a perfect spot by a small, serene lake, surrounded by trees so thick they almost blocked out the sun. As we set up our tents and gathered wood for the fire, a feeling of unease washed over me, but I brushed it off as mere excitement. First, signs of something strange. That first night, as we sat around the crackling campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories, I heard it, a faint rustling in the underbrush, just beyond the firelight. I glanced at the others, but they seemed oblivious. Lila was mid-laugh, her face illuminated by the dancing flames. "Did you hear that?" I asked, interrupting the moment. "Hear what?" Jake replied, looking around. "Probably just a raccoon or something," Max said dismissively. "This is their home after all." I nodded, trying to shake off the nagging feeling, but as the night wore on, the noises became more frequent. twigs snapping, leaves rustling, and once a low, guttural growl that sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like something was watching us. Escalation. The next morning, we woke to find our food supplies scattered around the campsite. Lila's favorite sweater was missing, and Jake's flashlight, which he swore he left by the tent, was nowhere to be found. The air was thick with tension as we tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a bear, Max suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. A bear wouldn't take a sweater, Lila pointed out, hugging herself as if to ward off the chill that had settled in. We decided to stay close to the campsite that day, exploring only the immediate area, but the feeling of being watched never left. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the trees, the unease grew into full-blown fear. Confrontation. That night, the noises returned with a vengeance. This time, they were accompanied by flickering shadows at the edge of our campsite, shapes that seemed to move and shift just beyond the reach of our firelight. We huddled closer to the fire, our earlier bravado replaced by silent dread. "I think we need to find out what's out there," Jake finally said, his voice trembling. Armed with flashlights and the only weapons we had, a couple of cooking knives and a sturdy branch, we ventured into the woods. The further we went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The trees seemed to close in around us, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. And then we saw it, a figure, hunched and grotesque, with eyes that glowed an eerie green in the darkness. It stood at the edge of a clearing, watching us with an intensity that made my blood run cold. "What the hell is that?" Max whispered, his voice barely audible. The figure let out a low, menacing growl and took a step towards us. In a blind panic, we turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, our flashlights bobbing wildly. The creature gave chase, its heavy footsteps thundering behind us. Climax, we stumbled and fell, the forest turning into a nightmare maze. My lungs burned, my legs felt like lead, but the thought of being caught by whatever was behind us kept me going. At one point, Jake tripped and fell hard. I stopped to help him up, risking a glance back. The creature was close, too close. With a burst of adrenaline, we managed to reach the campsite. We grabbed whatever we could, backpacks, sleeping bags, anything we could carry, and bolted for the car. The creature didn't follow us beyond the tree line, but its eyes watched us as we sped away. Resolution. We drove in silence, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. Back in the safety of civilization, it all felt surreal, like a bad dream. But the scratches on our arms, the bruises on our legs, and the missing items from our campsite were proof that it had been all too real. For weeks after, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a floorboard sent my heart racing. We never spoke of that night again, a silent agreement to bury the memory. But deep down, I knew I'd never forget the glowing eyes in the darkness and the sense of dread that still haunted my dreams. Next story that has no name. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth as I ventured deeper into the woods beyond my small, rural town. The forest had always been a place of solace for me, a refuge from the chaos of daily life. But today, I wasn't seeking solace. I was seeking answers. For weeks, strange noises had been reported by the townsfolk, low, guttural growls in the dead of night, shadows that moved in unnatural ways, and sightings of a creature unlike any known animal. My curiosity, combined with my duty as the local journalist, had led me to this investigation. Armed with my camera, a notebook, and a flashlight, I stepped into the dense forest, determined to uncover the truth. As the canopy closed above me, the light from the afternoon sun began to fade, casting long shadows that danced eerily across the forest floor. The further I walked, the more I felt the oppressive weight of the forest. The sounds of civilization faded away, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the distant calls of birds. I followed the path, less traveled, marked only by the occasional broken branch or disturbed patch of soil. According to the reports, most encounters had happened near the old logging road, a place long abandoned and overgrown. As I approached the area, a sense of unease settled over me. The air grew colder, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. I paused, scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. My flashlight cut through the dim light, revealing nothing but trees and underbrush. I pressed on, my footsteps crunching softly on the forest floor. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl that sent a shiver down my spine. It was close, too close. I froze, straining to pinpoint the source of the sound. The growl came again, this time accompanied by the rustling of leaves. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. There, standing at the edge of the light, was the creature. It was unlike anything I had ever seen, a grotesque amalgamation of features that seemed both familiar and utterly alien. It stood on two legs, hunched over, its eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Its body was covered in matted red fur, and its face was a nightmarish blend of human and animal features, a long snout, sharp teeth, and eyes that seemed to bore into my soul. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature let out another growl, its eyes never leaving mine. Slowly, it began to advance, each step deliberate and menacing. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a fallen branch. My mind raced, desperately trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Was this the cryptid that had been haunting the town? It had to be. Summoning every ounce of courage, I lifted my camera and snapped a picture. The flash illuminated the creature, revealing even more terrifying details. Clawed hands, powerful limbs, and a mouth that seemed to twist into a sinister grin. The creature recoiled from the light, letting out a snarl that echoed through the forest. Taking advantage of its momentary retreat, I turned and ran. The forest seemed to close in around me, branches clawing at my clothes and face as I sprinted through the underbrush. The growls followed me, growing louder and more frantic. I didn't dare look back, my only focus on escaping the nightmare that pursued me. My lungs burned and my legs felt like lead, but I didn't stop. I burst through the tree line and onto the old logging road, the creature still hot on my heels. I could hear its heavy footsteps, feel its presence just behind me. Panic surged through me as I realized I had nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. Just when I thought all was lost, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance, the headlights of a car. I screamed for help, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt, and the driver, an old man from the town, jumped out. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the creature emerging from the woods. Without hesitation, he pulled a rifle from the back of his truck and fired a shot into the air. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream and retreated into the darkness, its glowing eyes the last thing to disappear. The old man helped me into his truck, and we sped away, leaving the horrors of the forest behind. As we drove back to town, I tried to process what had happened. The creature was real, and I had the photographs to prove it. But more than that, I had a story that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The old man glanced at me, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "You saw it, didn't you?" he asked quietly. I nodded, my hand still trembling. "Yes, I did, and I think the whole town needs to know what's lurking in those woods." He nodded in agreement, his grip on the steering wheel tightening. "We'll tell them, but be careful. Some things are better left undiscovered." I knew he was right, but the journalist in me couldn't let it go. I had to share what I had seen, warn the townsfolk, and perhaps find a way to stop the creature before it could harm anyone else. As we approached the town, the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon, I made a silent vow to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The encounter had changed me, filled me with a sense of purpose and a determination to face the unknown. The cryptid was out there, lurking in the shadows, and I would be ready for it. My story was just beginning, and I was prepared to follow it wherever it led, even into the heart of darkness. Next story that has no name. The legends of Blackwater Swamp fascinated me. Nestled in the southeastern part of Louisiana, the swamp was notorious for its dense fog, murky waters, and the haunting stories that locals swore were true. Tales of ghostly apparitions, eerie lights, and strange, unidentifiable creatures had been passed down through generations. As an investigative journalist with a penchant for the supernatural, I couldn't resist the allure of uncovering the truth behind these tales. With a notebook in my hand, a camera around my neck, and a flashlight strapped to my belt, I set out on a humid, overcast day. The sky was a dull gray, and the air was thick with the scent of mud and decaying vegetation. The entrance to the swamp was marked by a rickety wooden sign that creaked in the wind, its faded letters barely legible. Blackwater Swamp. Enter at your own risk. As I stepped onto the narrow boardwalk that led into the swamp, the sounds of the nearby town faded away, replaced by the croaking of frogs and the distant calls of unseen birds. The water below was dark and still, reflecting the twisted, gnarled trees that rose from its depths. Spanish moss hung from the branches like tattered curtains, swaying gently in the breeze. The deeper I ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The fog rolled in, thick and impenetrable, cloaking the swamp in an eerie silence. I could barely see a few feet ahead, the world around me reduced to shadows and faint outlines. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to find nothing there when I turned to look. I stopped to jot down some notes, capturing the oppressive ambience of the swamp. As I wrote, a sudden splash broke the silence, followed by a series of ripples that spread across the water. I turned my flashlight toward the source of the disturbance, but the light barely penetrated the thick fog. My heart raced as I scanned the area, searching for any sign of what might have caused the splash. Suddenly, I heard a faint whisper, barely audible above the sounds of the swamp. It was as if someone or something was calling my name. Elliot? The voice was distant and ethereal, sending a chill down my spine. I turned in circles, trying to pinpoint the direction of the sound, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Determined to uncover the source of the whispers, I pressed on, my footsteps echoing on the wooden planks. The fog grew thicker, the air heavier, and the whispers more persistent. Elliot, they grew louder, more insistent, filling my mind with a sense of urgency and dread. I reached a small clearing where the boardwalk ended and the ground turned to soft, wet earth. In the center of the clearing stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its windows broken and its door hanging ajar. The whispers seemed to emanate from within, beckoning me closer. I hesitated at the threshold, my flashlight illuminating the interior. The cabin was a scene of decay and neglect, with broken furniture strewn about and vines creeping through the cracks in the walls. But amidst the chaos, my attention was drawn to a large, faded journal lying on a table in the center of the room. Cautiously, I stepped inside and approached the table. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as I reached for the journal. The cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. I opened it to the first page, and my breath caught in my throat. The journal belonged to a man named Jonathan Blake, a local historian who had disappeared over 50 years ago while researching the legends of Blackwater Swamp. His entries detailed his encounters with strange lights, ghostly apparitions, and a creature he described as the Shadow. According to his writings, the Shadow was a malevolent entity that haunted the swamp, feeding on the fear of those who ventured too close. As I read, the whispers intensified, and a cold, unnatural chill filled the room. The pages of the journal began to turn on their own, revealing more and more of Jonathan's desperate attempts to escape the clutches of the Shadow. His final entry was a frantic scrawl, pleading for anyone who found the journal to leave the swamp and never return. Suddenly, the door slammed shut and the room plunged into darkness. My flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in total blackness. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, each one more urgent and terrified than the last. I felt a presence in the room, a cold, suffocating force that seemed to wrap itself around me. I stumbled backward, crashing into the table and knocking the journal to the floor. The whispers reached a fever pitch, and I felt something cold and clammy brush against my arm. Panic surged through me, and I bolted for the door, wrenching it open and fleeing into the foggy swamp. I ran blindly, my heart pounding in my chest, the whispers chasing me through the darkness. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the swamp, where the fog finally began to lift and the oppressive atmosphere gave way to the sounds of the outside world. Gasping for breath, I collapsed onto the ground, my mind reeling from the terror I had just experienced. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of what had happened. I reviewed the photographs I had taken, but they were all blurred and indistinct, as if the swamp itself had conspired to erase any evidence of my encounter. The journal, however, remained clear in my memory, a chilling testament to the horrors that lurked within Blackwater Swamp. I knew I had to tell my story, to warn others of the dangers that awaited those who ventured too deep into the swamp. But even as I wrote, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the whispers were still following me, waiting for the right moment to draw me back into the shadows of Blackwater Swamp. Thank you for joining us tonight, brave listeners. As the shadows fade and the dawn approaches, we bid you farewell until our next eerie encounter. May the darkness always comfort you, and may your dreams be as haunting as our tales. Until next time, sleep well